Welcome to Excerpt Deep Dives, where we take a look at some things that you'll need if you want to win an orchestral audition. Because auditions take place under a metaphorical microscope, we need to make sure that we give the music our full attention, understanding the pitfalls, examining the details, and learning to play with style. This is style, apparently. I'm here to help you do that. If you're new here, let me tell you a little bit about myself. If you already know me, no worries, just skip ahead using the chapters in the video description below. Now, I've been around the audition block quite a few times. From youth orchestra auditions when I was a teenager, to school auditions when I got older, and then quite a few professional orchestra auditions in the past few years. After many attempts, I landed my job as Associate Principal Cello of the Jacksonville Symphony, where I'm now privileged to serve. I've had to dive deeply into so many orchestral excerpts to be able to get a job in an orchestra, and I've been coached by countless great teachers. So I'm here to pass on what I've learned and what I've found helpful in my own work on this music. First things first, just a quick disclaimer. If you have a teacher, I'm not trying to replace them. I'm just here to offer some additional insights, but I don't want to step on anybody's toes. Furthermore, some of the things that I'm going to tell you are up for interpretation. While things like rhythm and intonation are hard to dispute, there are undoubtedly people who will disagree on ways to interpret certain markings or what bowings to do or whatever, and that's to be expected. The buck doesn't stop with me. I'm just here to offer friendly advice in the best way that I know how. The other important thing is that sometimes a group or school you're auditioning for may give you an edition of an excerpt with slightly different things than I would play. In the case of the piece we're going to examine today, that would probably mostly be with regard to bowings. If the edition that they gave you has changes that would make it sound different, such as more or fewer things under slurs, it's generally a good idea to use those. Like I said, I'm here for friendly advice and friendly advice only. With all of that out of the way, today we're going to take a look at the second movement of Brahms' Second Symphony. This is almost ubiquitous, at least on lists for orchestras in the US. Almost every audition I've taken in my life has required it, so it's worth taking a look. To start, let's hear a playthrough. So, what are the things that a committee is going to be listening for? One thing that might not stand out immediately is rhythm. If you're not careful, it's super easy to lose the inner pulse and mess up the proportions. And in fact, later on, when we go and give some constructive criticism on my performance, we'll notice that that happened occasionally. Now, unless I've done really careful work with the metronome, there are little fluctuations in my rhythm that I hear when I record myself and listen back, but which I don't notice in the moment when I'm playing. So metronome practice and subdivision are both key, although that's kind of a general maxim anyway. Now, I like to subdivide at least 16th notes, if not 30 seconds. Tempo-wise, I like 42 to the quarter note. It gives the faster notes enough room to breathe without making the slower notes pedantic. Now, conductors may employ fluctuations in the tempo, but we unfortunately don't have the luxury to do that in an audition, so we need to use a Goldilocks tempo where it's just right, to give us the best chance to make everything sound good without ever changing the speed. Once you get the rhythm and tempo in good shape at 42, have the metronome speed to 21 and see if you can match up with it every 2 beats. Then, if you have a metronome that can do decimal BPM speeds, have that once more to 10.5. I like the TE Tuner app, which lets me do that, and I'll link it in the description. The committee is also going to be listening for quality of tone. Does your sound match how they want Brahms to sound? And of course, they want to hear great phrasing and attention to dynamics. Let's start there, because we get our first little problem with that at the very beginning of this excerpt. Namely, what in the heck is poco forte? This is something that you'll see a lot in Brahms. I'm sure it exists in someone else's music too, but nothing else comes to mind to me right now. The point is, though, it's kind of his thing, so it's worth trying to figure it out. We see the F for forte, and we think loud. Now, forte's literal translation is strong, so poco forte would mean a little strong. But that still doesn't make too much sense. I think what we need to do is separate the concept of forte into 2 parts, the volume part and the character part. The volume part is pretty straightforward, but the character part is a little more nebulous. To me, a forte character tends to be bold, assertive, dominant in the sound, those types of things. But that doesn't really fit with the tenderness of this excerpt. So I think that this poco forte is telling us to keep the sound prominent, but to tone down any in-your-face quality that a forte might have elsewhere. With that in mind, let's figure out how we want to approach it at the cello. I think that it's important, firstly, that we don't start with a strong attack. I like a really smooth, buttery sound at the beginning. To help achieve that, I try to keep the hair of my bow very flat. A beautiful full tone devoid of any aggression whatsoever. Slow-ish vibrato with enough width to make it rich, but not so much that it makes it distracting or messes with the intonation. In general, too, it's really good to just think the word open when it comes to the sound of this excerpt. Anyway, once we have a good baseline sound, how are we going to phrase it? For help with that, we look to the bassoons. They have the same line at the beginning that we have going into measure 13. Ba-da-dee-dee-da-dim, da-ya-ba-da-ba-da-dum. I don't know if that was in the right key or not. I don't have absolute pitch, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, we can use that counterpoint to inform our approach. We're starting the movement on the dominant, so there's already some inherent harmonic tension. But that tension becomes greater yet once we get to the second beat of the first full bar. And that's because we get our first note outside of the key in the bassoons. They start that beat with a B sharp. Now, for my fellow theory nerds, the function of that B sharp is to tonicize the supertonic chord, which we get in the following bar, even though it's still above a dominant pedal. The point is, though, that we have added to the harmonic tension, and we ought to reflect that in our playing. We have this voice exchange with the bassoons where they're playing B sharp, C sharp, D sharp, and we're playing D sharp, C sharp, B sharp. I think the best course of action is to phrase to our B sharp at the bottom. As you go down, pivot your arm and by extension your hand just a little bit back so that you can prepare for the shift down from E to D sharp. On the next pickup, we reset and begin the line again, which I think we should do in a very similar dynamic to the beginning. This time, though, there's considerably more release in the harmony. Use that antecedent-consequent paradigm to make a contrast, so we can relax the sound a little bit in beats 2 and 3 of measure 2. Be careful, though, that the relaxation in sound does not equate to a relaxation in tempo. That is trap number 1. Now, once we arrive at the pickups to bar 3, we have a new character. The texture changes in the orchestra, switching to a lovely wind and brass chorale, and anyone who had poco forte before is no longer marked at that dynamic, except for us. So, while we still want to be prominent, we should show the committee that we know that the music has changed a little bit, and we can go for a little bit more lightness in the sound. Maybe just by using slightly less hair. Just maybe a gentle little tilt-a-rooney in the bow. Keep the majesty, keep the quality of the tone, just make it a little more tender. Once we arrive at the next downbeat, we're at kind of an infamous place. Because we've got this sustained music going on all around us, we have slurs, but he writes staccato markings over each note? What's going on with that? Well, the way that I've been taught, those don't mean a true staccato in this case. Rather, they indicate separation between the notes under the slur, a beautiful portato. Somewhat shorter than before, but still with some length, and definitely still with a cohesive musical line. Now, the relative simplicity of this passage makes it very tempting to rush. Don't. Speaking of which, we're coming to some more rhythmic traps. Let's talk about them. The 16th rests in measures 4 and 5 are super sneaky, especially 5 because there's more shifting distance involved. Once you get up to that high B, it is already almost time to come down. Like one of those super short flights where they engage the landing gear basically the second they get to 35,000 feet. So how do we get up and back in time while keeping it cantabile, singing? The first thing is to keep the bow close to the string. Don't make some grand flourish in the air during either of those 16th rests. It may be a little bit tempting, but we need to stay close to our home base so that we can get the note thereafter really quickly. Also, the second time around, with that big shift, you can use the crescendo to do some of the heavy lifting, letting it help carry the ring of the sound so that you can make a quick exit from the B down to the D sharp, without losing the energy of the line. And make sure you're really preparing the shift well with your elbow so that you can get up there fast. I think that this shift should be pretty subtle too. That is to say, try to hide any profound sliding or old finger stuff. Doing a nice fast shift can help you do that, and it'll help you get to the high note in time too. Once you get back down, it is just about time for a super quick decrescendo. This dotted quarter note is one where it's very tempting to linger, but we can't afford to do that. So do the decrescendo quite swiftly and don't use too much bow. That'll help clear out the sound and get you ready for the new phrase that starts in the next bar. Okay, this passage coming up with all the eighth notes is another one where there's a little bit of a rhythmic trap, because it's tempting to use subtle tempo changes to augment the line. Obviously, in an audition, we can't do that, but we still need to make it sound pretty and make musical sense. So how do we compensate for the fact that we can't change to a more flowing tempo? The first thing is that we need to make sure we contrast our articulation very starkly to what we have in measure 3. Before, we wanted this slight separation from the dots over the notes, but we need to keep it completely legato here. Slow-ish bow, but with the bow moving still at all times. To practice this legato, you can play this passage with the bow on the strings you'll be using, but with the fingers of the left hand shifted down one string, so that you'll hear any breaks in continuity of the sound very easily, since you'll just be hearing open strings, even though you'll be moving the fingers in your left hand. Do a little gentle phrasing in this passage too, but don't begin the upcoming crescendo early. You want to show that you know exactly where it starts and that you can pace it appropriately. Stylistically, I like to do this passage with a pretty small amount of vibrato to help keep it gentle. It's also a minefield of tricky shifts, so those are important to practice to help get the intonation in good shape. Okay, let's move along. Measure 8 contains 2 leaps. The second is both larger and farther along in the crescendo than the first one. So I think that it merits consideration of how we deal with each shift and how we differentiate between the two. Since the intensity increases based upon those 2 metrics I gave you, I think we should hide the first shift up as well as the corresponding shift down as best we can. And then we can be more expressive with a tasteful slide up for the second one. Thereafter, we'll continue the crescendo. It's important to really open up the sound here. We're coming to a dominant harmony of the dominant, and we can show off that harmonic tension. Bar 10 is a little bit peculiar because we don't have any dynamics. We don't even know where the crescendo we just had was supposed to go. I think of it as being sort of a forte, maybe between the poco forte at the beginning and a true forte forte. Still warm, but a bit more prominent than where we started the excerpt. We encounter another issue too in 10 and 11. That is, there's no phrasing marked at all, but I think there absolutely has to be phrasing from us. The music just calls for it. Okay, moving right along. Crescendo brings us to a poco forte on the final beat of measure 12. To get that note with as little break in the sound as possible, make sure to bring your finger you'll use for the low F sharp over to the C string before you go down there. I call it engaging my claw. We'll disengage it shortly thereafter, don't worry. Also, drop your right elbow a little bit so that you can more easily angle the bow to the C string. So, let's talk about this little passage now. Because we cellists are thieving scoundrels, we shamelessly steal the bassoon's melody from the beginning. And like before, it's set in counterpoint with the opening theme of the movement. This time, though, the first flute plays it. So hear that internally, as you do, etc. If you were just subdividing 16ths before, make sure to move to 30 seconds now, because we're about to have them. Now those 30 seconds in 14, it's really easy for them to sound muddy, especially given the low register. Make sure you're articulating them well with your fingers. I like to keep a relatively slow bow for these two. And afterwards, when it goes from F sharp to D sharp, I used to actually shift back on the G string going to 4, but that turned out to be quite unreliable for me. So I now much prefer to go to 1 on that D sharp and then smoothly cross over to the C string for the B in measure 15. Speaking of the B in measure 15, it's really easy to shortchange it because it's so static. So that's the first thing to watch out for. Also, make sure you're keeping it warm, but understated, because after all, it is piano. The violins are playing the same material that we have in measure 3, so hear those eighth notes in your head, but subdivided. Bum, 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 bum. Now, continuing not to rush, or drag for that matter, we come to the delicate final two measures. Make sure, though, that you note that sometimes the excerpt ends after the long B, and other times it goes on a little bit. It's usually over by the end of measure 17, but make sure to double and triple check to make sure that you're going to end at the correct spot. If you are playing these measures at the end, be very gentle, especially in the final bar. We have both a diminuendo and a decrescendo marked, and based on the context, I think it should be a diminuendo to almost nothing. In an audition, still audible to the committee, but still really soft. That's because during that measure, there's a horn solo that comes in, and the whole rest of the orchestra drops out in the following bar. If we drop out too obviously, it's going to make the transition to this lone horns line too abrupt. The other important thing to mention about these last two bars is that when we're crossing a fifth over to the C string, it can be really useful to do a subtle finger replacement. This can help make the line smoother. So for example, 3, 1, 3, 1, 4, 2, 3. So that's about it for tips that come to mind on this Brahms excerpt. I know we've covered a ton of little details, so I'll just mention one overarching thing now. Play in tune! So with all this advice, let's take a listen again to the full excerpt. I'll put little things on screen throughout to showcase some of the things that we've just talked about. And after we listen, we'll take a look at the things that I think I can improve on going forward. If you'd like a copy of this music with those reminders that I mentioned, head on down to the video description. I've created my own edition of this excerpt, and I'm making it available for free under the Creative Commons by 4.0 license. I'm including a PDF as well as Sibelius and Music XML files, in case there are markings that I added that you want to take out or whatever. I hope this helps you in your audition journey. And if you think that it will, I would surely appreciate a like, a sub, and a quick click on that bell so that you can get notifications when I release a new video. And if you can't stand my interpretation of this piece, feel free to use the dislike button. I release new full-length videos every Monday and Friday, and shorts throughout the week, and I hope you'll join me. So with that being said, let's take a listen. Okay, so what did Cello Ben screw up? Well, that's not a very nice way to put it. Let's be kind to ourselves, shall we? I'm overall proud of how this came out, but I recognize that there's always room for improvement. The first thing is the rhythm. While it's mostly good, there are a couple of spots where I press forward a little bit. For example, measure 9 and around measure 14 too. So those are some spots for me to make sure to be conscious of and which could use some more TLC, especially with metronome. I also noticed that I didn't give enough separation between the last two notes of measure 5. The way I played them, it sounds like there's a slur between them, so I need to be careful to not slur them together by accident, because that's not what's on the page. And the last self-criticism I'll mention for now is that the string and finger crossings in the final 2 bars could be quite a bit smoother. I'm sure there are plenty of other little things that I'll notice as I continue to watch this video more times, but those are the main things that stood out to me for now. For the most part, though, I know what needs work, and I can file that away in the old noggin in case I ever need this excerpt for something in the future. And with that, we've come to the end of today's video, but I want to hear from you in the comments what you think maybe I've missed in terms of suggestions, or if you have questions about this excerpt. Obviously, I've tried to give a pretty comprehensive guide here, but I can't cover literally everything there is to cover or every point of view or anything, and I'm sure there are plenty of important things that I haven't talked about yet that do merit discussion. Let me know in the comments below, as well as what other excerpts you would like me to cover on these deep dives. As you watched the video, I hope that you learned something and maybe laughed a little bit. And if you're not a cellist yet, but you're an adult who wants to become one, I have a cello course specifically for adult beginners, which can be found either by visiting the address shown on screen or through the link in the description. The course provides all the information you need to get started, even if you don't know how to read music yet. And if you're still hungry for some more cello and music-related content, I cordially invite you to check out these videos here. My friend, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, and I can't wait to see you next time.